So, hello everyone. I'd like to now officially welcome you to today's webinar. I'm Jessica Birch with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session with one of my colleagues, Eric Powell. Eric Powell is a person who enjoys service and giving back to the community. We're going to introduce him here fully in a moment. So as I mentioned, my name is Jessica Birch. I'm with the Corporation for National and Community Service. I served as an AmeriCorps Vista member from 2011 to 2012 with the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault in Ketchikan, Alaska, the salmon capital of the world. After leaving service, I worked at the Vista Member Support Unit in Austin, Texas, and I'm now a training coordinator with the AmeriCorps Vista program. As I mentioned, also with us from CNCS is Eric Powell. Eric Powell is a person who enjoys service, giving back to people in the community, and is always being happy. He served as a Vista member in 2006 with Rhode Island Campus Compact at Roger Williams University. He then served as a Vista leader in 2008 with Illinois Campus Compact at its main office located at DePaul University, or DePaul, I don't know why I said that weird. He now works for CNCS as an AmeriCorps Vista training coordinator, organizing pre-service orientations and supervisor orientations. So, Eric, welcome.
Thank you, Jessica.
And I'd like to now welcome our main speaker today, Carrie Stevens. Carrie is an AmeriCorps Vista and AmeriCorps State and National alum. She's a licensed clinical social worker with a master's in social work. Carrie also holds a master's in addiction counseling certification, and she has worked with homeless veterans in Portland, Oregon since 2012. So welcome, Carrie. Also joining us are Rachel Raddick and Jenny Farrell from our partners at Education Northwest. They've helped to prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. You're going to see them in the chat and the Q&A to help address questions you may have during this session. So now, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie, who's going to share with us the goals of today's session. Carrie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jessica. It's great to be with you today. The topics we will discuss today are based on requests made by participants on our November webinar on mental health. Participants asked that we talk more in depth about stress and anxiety, trauma and trauma-informed care, and communication and relationship building. We're going to give you and provide you with information and resources regarding these topics and give you a chance to ask questions and connect with one another. This webinar is for you, and we want you to help steer the conversation around these topics. I want to note and recognize that this is heavy subject matter, and if the discussion is triggering to you, it's totally okay to take a break and take care of yourself. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, hotline is always available 24/7 for additional support, resources, and referrals. Also available is the Lines for Life number that you can call or text to 273-8255, and the crisis text line, which will also be shown in our chat section. You can text words to 741-741 to text with a trained crisis counselor for free, 24/7 in the United States. Please note that the resources and information we mention in today's webinar is information I have found to be very valuable in my work, but these resources and information are not necessarily endorsed by the Corporation for National and Community Service. Now let's begin with the topic of stress. As we discussed in the previous mental health webinar, stress is how the brain and body respond to any demand. Every type of demand or stressor, such as exercise, work, school, major life changes, or traumatic events, can be stressful. There are different types of stress, all of which carry physical and mental health risks. A stressor may be a one-time or short-term occurrence, like seasonal changes with the change in the cold weather months, or stress around preparing for a big interview. Or it can be an occurrence that keeps happening over a long period of time. Stress can affect your physical and mental health. It's important to pay attention to how you deal with minor and major stress events so that you know when to seek help. We also want to acknowledge that the holiday season can create and add to our stress and feelings of anxiety. Feeling more stressed and anxious around this time of year is totally normal. I know I've been feeling more stressed at work this week because it's a short work week for me and I'm having to cram in, a full week of work into 3 days. And I've been managing this stress by engaging in my self-care practice and trying to be as proactive and organizing what I need to accomplish. We can learn to manage stress by engaging in coping skills and behaviors such as taking a time out from social media, getting regular exercise, practicing mindfulness, yoga, journaling, staying connected with others and ourselves, recognizing the signs and symptoms of stress, and reaching out and seeing a primary care provider or mental health professional if our stress levels are becoming too overwhelming. One of the ways to start identifying things you can do to proactively manage stress and support your overall health is to create a self-care plan. As this slide shows, one of the tools we have provided you with is a handout to begin to create your own self-care plan. As we walk through today's discussion, we encourage you to write down any coping strategies that you would like to include in your self-care plan. There are a lot of different self-care plans out there, and this is just one example to get you started so that you can note the steps you plan to take after this webinar. Now I would like to take some time to walk us through a coping strategy that I have found very helpful in my work. This is a quick mindfulness exercise called 5 Senses that you can add to your self-care plan. For those of you who might not be familiar with the term mindfulness, mindfulness is the non-judgmental practice of bringing your thoughts and awareness to the present moment. Practicing mindfulness can go a long way in reducing stress. And all you need for this exercise is just to notice something around you with each of the 5 senses. Now follow this in order to practice this exercise. Notice 5 things that you can see. Look around you and bring attention to 5 things that you can see in your office. Pick something that you don't normally notice, like a shadow on your office wall or posters around your office or desk. Notice 4 things that you can feel. Bring awareness to 4 things that you are currently feeling, like the texture of your pants, the feeling of the keyboard under your fingers, or the smooth surface of a table you are resting your hands on. Notice 3 things that you can hear. Take a moment to listen and note the things that you can hear in the background. This can be the sound of typing, your colleagues talking, or the faint sounds of traffic from a nearby road. Notice 2 things you can smell. Bring your awareness to smells that you usually filter out, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. Perhaps the smell of coffee or the smell of your lunch or snack. Notice 1 thing you can taste. Focus on 1 thing that you can taste right now, in the moment. You can take a sip of a drink, chew a piece of gum, or eat something. This is a quick and relatively easy exercise to help bring you to a mindful state, to relieve some stress quickly. I know I practice this exercise after stressful client meetings or phone calls, and it really helps me take a step back from my work and focus more on the present, and it definitely helps ground me so I can continue on with my work day. Now we're going to hear from you about mindfulness in your workspaces. And I'm going to pass the presentation back to Jessica.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for that mindfulness exercise. I can definitely do that at my desk as well. We would like to hear from you, as Carrie mentioned. How much time can you devote to mindfulness and stress reduction techniques through your workday? So we want to use the features that we have available in our WebEx system. So to find the annotation tools, you're going to click on the pin in the upper right corner of the screen, and it'll expand the annotation toolbar. Next, click on the arrow next to the square and select either the check mark or the X, but don't click on the screen yet. So find those quickly, go to that square, and then find, it should have the expand button and find the mark or the X. And so then from here, we're going to go back to that question. So how much time can you devote to mindfulness and stress reduction techniques throughout your workday? So can you devote lots of time or no time? So put those check marks, X's, whatnot on the screen. And I see some of you are using the little pennants, I guess, or little arrows. That's totally fine. If you want to be anonymous, you can do that as well and use the little check marks. But yeah.
And it looks like so far we have people all scattered out. There's a huge concentration in the middle, but I see a lot of people posting now in the middle saying it looks like maybe they're unsure, but they think they have some time, which is always good to make sure, as Jessica said, you are able to devote at least a little bit of your time to be able to looking at this.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge spectrum here. There's not one, everyone's always in lots of time or everyone's in no time. So yeah, so a lot of different things coming through here. One of the things I saw, that's kind of coming up in the chat, and I'm going to turn this over to Carrie, there's a lot of questions about what's the difference between self-care and coping. So Carrie, can you provide maybe like a quick, what makes those two different, coping skills versus self-care? Like what's the difference to you in that?
I think coping is just kind of how we manage different situations, different interactions, and self-care is kind of bringing our awareness to taking care more of ourselves in this work role, if that makes sense. So it's self-care is more of, it's a kind of a survival skill. It can help us to be, help us be more present in this work, and it refers more to the activities and practices that we can engage in to reduce stress and maintain and enhance our practice and our overall health and well-being.
Thank you, Carrie. And it looks like other people here have a lot of kind of the same thing. Gwendolyn said self-care is taking care of yourself, making sure you don't end up in a state of panic or survival mode, whereas coping is you're making it through, but you're kind of in the midst of that. So thank you. Thank you for that, Carrie. Eric, want to take us to our next piece?
Yes. So we're going to be moving into a chat question. We'd really like to hear from you, so take a minute now to tell us if you are a VISTA member or a VISTA supervisor and what stresses are related to your job. Please make sure to enter your ideas in the chat box, not the Q&A panel, the chat box, and make sure you send it to all participants. And if you're on a mobile device, remember that you can find the chat feature at the bottom of the participant panel. We'll take a minute now to see what people think is stress. And so I see one or two VISTAs say it looks like decision-making is a stressful thing, and that as a VISTA you are empowered to make some decisions, but it can be stressful.
Someone else said the glacial pace of decision-making. So I know we say at PSO, we say, the work may be slow, like you may not see instant results. So that can be stressful. You're like, I just want to see this happen, or I want this to get done, but having to rely on others or take time can be difficult.
And there's a couple saying, VISTA member is saying communicating with their supervisor is stressful. Hopefully that doesn't last long because you want to make sure you have open lines of communication, but I do understand that sometimes there might be an urgent matter that you're not sure how to bring forward to them, so it can be a little stressful in thinking about how to resolve it.
A lot of other kind of topics kind of along the same lines. There's a lot of workload is heavy, or trying to prioritize can be difficult, finding what really do I need to get done right now. Too much work or not enough staff at the same time seems to be a theme here.
And I see a supervisor, it looks like their stressor is being a first-time supervisor, so just really understanding what does it mean to be a supervisor and what does it mean to be a VISTA supervisor.
People sit here managing finances. Money can be stressful. I mean, all of that, trying to budget for that, managing, a lot of managing finances in here. As Eric mentioned, communication can be difficult and stressful, whether that's miscommunication or not enough, or maybe you feel micromanaged, it's too much communication. So that's a lot of relationships in here.
So with that question, we know that sometimes when stressful things come up, what stress reduction techniques do you use to relieve that stress? So the question is, what mindfulness and stress reduction techniques are you currently using in your day-to-day work life? A lot of you talked, as Jessica and I said, about what stresses you, but how do you personally take the time and energy to start working towards relieving that stress?
Well, a lot of people say taking a walk, journaling. Someone said just straight up crying in my car.
Oh.
I mean, if that works for you and that's a great constructive thing, wonderful. Each person does their own thing, but a lot of other things in here, like solo camping, I saw.
I see some people do yoga and lifting. I'm assuming that means lifting weights in their personal time just to free their mind and help their body and mind stay in tune with each other.
Someone else said body scan. I'm not quite sure what that is. I don't know if it's kind of like scanning, taking time to think about your body and make sure that, everything feels okay, taking time to notice each piece.
Yeah, maybe that relates to self-care like Carrie was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look here.
And I see a lot of people talking about when you can take a short break to go for a walk or listen to music. A lot of people, that's not only a stress reducer, but it really just helps you to be a little bit more positive and get your brain away from whatever's causing you stress and anxiety.
Sure, and I saw someone else here said, I cry too, and, Eric, I have to tell you, a couple weeks ago, I was just I just needed to cry, so I just, watched a bunch of sad movies. It just felt like I needed to cry.
Sometimes you have to, yeah.
Lots of water, keeping that physical piece of you healthy as well. Yeah, as Julia said here, crying can be very therapeutic. Yes, nothing wrong with crying, definitely nothing wrong with that. Get it out.
Yep.
These are great. So keep putting them in there. We want to hear all the different things that you do, because something that maybe you do, somebody else didn't think of before.
Exactly. So we'll now turn it back over to Carrie to continue with the presentation. Carrie?
Thank you all for sharing all of those responses. I know the things that I'm seeing up there, there's a few of them I want to add to my self-care plan. And remember that you can also write these down, add to your self-care plan, and refer to them later. I encourage you all to keep sharing with one another in the chat as we now transition into talking about anxiety. All of us have felt anxious or experienced anxiety at some point in our lives. I know when I first started as a Vista in a new city and work environment, I was incredibly anxious for my first day and week at work. I didn't know how to use the public transit system, and I ended up being late on my first day. And it was rough, but it was a good experience because then I learned how to utilize public transit in the future. And we wanted to touch on the holiday season again and note that we can feel more stressed during the season and time of year. Some of us may be processing grief and loss responses or having anxiety around meeting or spending time with friends and family. These are totally normal anxiety and stress responses. It is okay to let yourself feel these emotions, acknowledge them, take time out for yourself, and try and plan ahead for what you can. Let's transition to talking more about what anxiety is and what it can look like. As I mentioned earlier, everyone experiences anxiety, but when it becomes overwhelming and repeatedly impacts a person's life, this may be more of an anxiety disorder. Some of the emotional symptoms of anxiety or experiences of anxiety can look like feelings of apprehension or dread, feeling tense or jumpy, feeling restlessness or irritable, anticipating the worst and being watchful for signs of danger. Those are some of the emotional symptoms. Some of the physical symptoms of anxiety may be experiencing a pounding or racing heart and shortness of breath, experiencing, an increase in sweating, tremors, or twitches, having more headaches, fatigue, and insomnia, or having an upset stomach, frequent urination or diarrhea. Some of the coping skills that can help reduce the onset of anxiety or mitigate your anxiety can include exercising regularly, practicing yoga, journaling, drawing, taking a time out for yourself and engage in a meditative or mindfulness exercise, getting enough sleep, eating well-balanced meals, calling or emailing a friend that you've been out of touch with, just accepting that you are doing your best, taking deep breaths, reducing caffeine and alcohol intake, and finding things that make you laugh. I know when I'm feeling really anxious at work, I'll take a minute to take a quick walk around my building or make a cup of tea, and that can kind of just help as a way for me to reduce some of those anxious feelings. We would like to hear more from you about your experience with anxiety and self-care. Jessica, back to you.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for that information around anxiety. So we now want everyone to share with us what types of self-care activities may support you in dealing with anxiety in your workplace. So these could be strategies that you've already implemented at your work site, but it could be things that maybe this webinar kind of got you thinking. So what types of self-care activities may support that? That could be things in the moment while you're at the workplace, or this could be things to help you prepare to be at the workplace. So what are some of the things that are some activities? Looks like someone here said kickboxing daily. Kickboxing is hard. I did it. It was hard. But way to go, kickboxing. I like it.
And I see someone said counting down from 10 to 0, which might seem simple, but something like that, just reshifting your brain and just taking a 10 or 15-second break can really ease anxiety.
Exactly. I like this one. Listen to oldies radio station. I love it. I like singing in my car, so I could definitely get down with that. Playing
with silly putty, absolutely. Breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Please make sure you breathe.
Yes.
Seriously, take a deep breath.
Let's see, Rebecca here says, I close my eyes and take a deep breath. Let's see, Elizabeth said, my site has a walking group during warmer months, which is a nice activity for people to go outside, get a little exercise, and connect with one another. That's great. Eric, we do that with our team, too. We sometimes take a little, we might go to lunch somewhere together, just get out of the office and walk around a bit.
Yep, and if you're a Vista who's interested in doing that, but that's not going on at your site, suggest it to your supervisor, or maybe 10 or 15 minutes of your lunch break, get some people together and try to start that. It could be a really, really good positive benefit.
Yeah, and someone else here said 4-7-8 breathing. So for those of you who don't know what this is, and please, I don't know who said that, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what it is 4-7-8 breathing is you take a deep breath in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 7 seconds, and then you let it out for 8 seconds. It really kind of takes the focus away from the anxiety and the nervousness and all of that and focuses it on the breathing because you're counting. Carrie, have you ever done the 4-7-8 breathing or anything like that? I mean, the 5 senses exercise a little bit, but have you ever done anything like that?
No, I haven't. I know I've done the body scan that was mentioned earlier, but I'm not familiar with the 7-7-7 or the one you mentioned.
Yeah, 4-7-8. I think it can be done in almost an increment, but yeah. Yeah, and then this one, Aaron said, recognizing that feelings are real but not reality. That's very profound. I really like that, Aaron.
Definitely.
Eric, do you see any other ones in here?
Just, I see, as we talked earlier, some people said reading a book, and again, drinking herbal tea or drinking something that helps you be alert and be aware of what's going on. But these are all great ideas.
And keep them coming. Carrie is going to share with us now some anxiety and stress-related resources, but as we've mentioned at PSO, as we mentioned on a lot of these webinars, you are one of the greatest resources to one another. So continue to put what you do in the chat. We all want to hear them. And as we mentioned at the beginning, we're going to post these with all the resources you share with the recording. But as I said, Carrie's now going to share with us some anxiety and stress-related resources. So Carrie, I'm going to give it back over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. Before sharing these resources, I did want to clarify there was a chat question about the differences between just normal anxiety and having an anxiety disorder. And I just wanted to reference, so normal anxiety, usually occurs in response or reaction to some stressor. That can be, having an interview or presenting like I am right now, or it could be, an upcoming job, promotion, relationship stressors. And it can develop, or an anxiety disorder is different than this, whereas normal anxiety is typically short-lived and doesn't usually interfere with your life dramatically. An anxiety disorder tends to be more chronic in nature, and it can have a significant impact on your daily life and kind of your day-to-day and how you function. I hope that helps clarify about anxiety. And we wanted to share some of these anxiety and stress resources that can be helpful to you or your colleagues. And they're posted on the slide. They include the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or NAMI, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, Psychology Today. They have a great blog on strategies to beat anxiety, the National Institute of Health, and different alternative health practices that you can utilize around anxiety and stress. And the Positive Psychology program, they have a listing of mindfulness exercises that we'll share on our resource list. There's also free mindfulness and meditation apps that you can use on your smartphone. I've used a couple, Calm, Headspace, the Mindfulness app, MindBody, Insight Timer, and Smiling Mind. A list of all of the resources shared today can be found on the Vista campus at the following link posted in the chat. Participants of the November webinar also requested to learn more about trauma-informed care and trauma. Let's first start by defining what we mean when we say trauma. What is trauma, and what does it look like? Trauma is the unique individual experience of an event or enduring condition in which a person's ability to integrate his or her emotional experience is overwhelmed. Trauma is an emotional response to an event like an accident, assault, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical, and that can occur. We are all affected and impacted by trauma. We may have experienced our own trauma or are exposed to trauma either through our work, our friends, family, and maybe in our personal lives. We can ask for additional help and support at our work sites by utilizing a reasonable accommodation. Examples of reasonable accommodation requests can include minor accommodations in work schedule, flexible schedule to allow staff to attend mental health or self-care appointments throughout the workday, changes in how your workday is scheduled, having the option to telecommute a day or two a month if approved by your supervisor or your work site. So now, what is trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care is a program, organization, or system that is trauma-informed and realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands the paths for healing, recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in staff, clients, and others involved in the system, and responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, practices, procedures, and settings. Some examples of trauma-informed care at the work site might include ensuring the physical and emotional safety of our colleagues and clients by creating a welcoming work environment and responding to safety concerns, maintaining appropriate boundaries in our work setting, and having clear and consistent work tasks and roles, and having regular discussions with our supervisors or members that includes discussion around self-care and self-care practice. In my role at the VA, we take a trauma-informed care approach to our work with veterans. We have a no fragrance policy because smells can act as a trigger for our clients who may have experienced trauma. Trauma-informed care work policies are created to recognize that some aspects of our work environment or a service being provided can re-traumatize. As helping professionals, we can also experience vicarious trauma. If we are regularly engaging with and interacting with distressing situations, especially for those who work with survivors of abuse and trauma, we can carry these stories of trauma and they can change our worldview. It is part of the human condition to be affected by the pain of others. Signs of vicarious trauma can include exhaustion and physical ailments, such as headaches and sleep difficulties, experiencing emotional shifts, including feeling more irritable or hopeless, changes in our thought patterns, such as having difficulty seeing new solutions, behavioral shifts, such as having increased absences from work, or using behaviors such as substances to escape, and relationship changes, like not having a separation between our work and personal lives. We can manage and sustain ourselves in this work by engaging in proactive and self-care activities. Some self-care activities that I practice and I found to be helpful in maintaining and sustaining in this work include exercising, practicing yoga, consulting with my peer group and supervisor, and reading non-work related books that usually involve something paranormal. I'm now going to transition this back to Eric, and he's going to lead you in a chat around trauma-informed care practices at your work sites.
Thank you, Carrie. We would now like to hear from you again about your experience with trauma-informed care practices at your work site. Have you seen trauma-informed care practices utilized at your organization? If so, what do these practices look like? Again, please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure you send to all participants. As Carrie mentioned, at the VA, they have a no fragrance policy because smells can be a trigger for some veterans who have experienced trauma. So type your comments in the chat and we'll do a brief report out of some of the things that we see.
All right, looks like the first one is peer discussions.
Okay.
So okay, like having those kind of discussions. Let's take a look. As Carrie mentioned, you know, the VA has that no fragrance policy because people may be triggered by a traumatic experience. What other things are you seeing in here?
So some people say they have not seen it, but the ones that have, they found it useful to have the organization have a larger either conversation around racism or other trauma. Sorry, that didn't come out right. Racism not traumatic, but my point was the organization has an organization-wide meeting about different topics related to trauma or other topics, which can be really useful practice.
That's right. Let's see here. Let's see. Melanie says, my program supervisor uses trauma-informed care. They were on the line and pointed out how we react and treat one another is key to our work with Native American communities.
Wow.
Great.
And I also see the organization is trying to work to avoid burnout. So one of the practices they're implementing is just working with the nonprofit workers to see why they're burning out and what they can do to help prevent that. Makes sense.
I like this one. Someone mentioned walking meetings. I like that. It's like, you're going to have a meeting anyway. Like, instead of just sitting down where we are sitting all day, let's walk around.
Absolutely. And there's quite a few no's, which, you know, if you're saying no, you haven't seen the practices, it could mean that they do exist and you just are not aware of them, or it might mean that your organization doesn't currently have those, but maybe it's something you could help implement or look into. And then I think the last one I'll read out so we can move on is, again, people talk about music. A couple of records that came out. Hopefully they mean the real old school vinyl records because I love those. But again, that's another practice to try to handle anyone who's dealing with trauma-informed care and help them really transition into overcoming that obstacle. So now we're going to turn it back over to Carrie to discuss communication. Carrie, back to you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for sharing all of those responses. I love the walk and talk meeting idea. I think I can really use that in my practice. Now we're going to transition into talking a little bit more about communication. Previous participants of our November webinar wanted more info on communication. Some specific examples that came up included, how do I talk with my VISTA or supervisor about mental health? How can I ensure that my VISTA member is getting the support they need without encroaching on their privacy? How, as a VISTA member, can I talk to my supervisor about my needs when I'm worried about being stigmatized? I know first and foremost, we want to help decrease stigma in our workplaces by creating supportive work environments. This is essential to allowing for positive communication. Stigma can cause people living with a mental health condition or someone who is experiencing more stress and anxiety to feel embarrassed or afraid to reach out for help, which can make the road to recovery longer and more painful and isolating. During my VISTA year, I had to reach out to my supervisor and ask for help when I had a health-related issue. My VISTA leader and supervisor were really collaborative. They were supportive of me taking time off, and they helped to reduce the anxiety I felt about being away from work. We wanted to check in with you with this poll question. How comfortable are you asking for personal or emotional help? Please answer the poll questions on the right side of your screen.
Thank you, Carrie. So as Carrie mentioned, there's going to be a poll that's going to open here in just a moment on the right-hand side.
This is Rachel. We're experiencing some technology difficulties with the poll, so let's move on to the related chat question.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. So we just talked about communication. So let's just take this as a chat question. How comfortable do you feel, and why do you feel that way? Our next question that was going to be on the screen, or did the poll results surprise you? But you don't know the poll results. So let us know how comfortable do you feel and why? Why are you giving it that rating? So let's take a look and see if people are chatting in here. Okay, so someone said not very comfortable because their supervisor changed partway through their service. Yeah, so that's difficult. If you've built a relationship with someone and then now that kind of changes, it can be hard to, you're testing the waters with that new person. It's kind of almost like you're starting over again.
I see a slightly, not concerning, but response of, I don't feel comfortable for asking for help because I don't want to appear incapable of my job. I certainly understand the sentiment, but also understand that as a growing professional, as a VISTA member and a supervisor, part of growing and learning is asking questions, so it might just be working on how to ask the question so that they know you're asking in a way to learn as opposed to making it sound like you don't know what you're doing.
That's right, and this next one I want to ask Carrie to chime in about. Someone said, I don't feel very comfortable because, talking to my supervisor about anxiety because I don't know their stance on mental health or illness. So Carrie, how would you recommend someone goes about talking to someone if they don't really know their stance? Like you don't really know what they're going to think about mental illness or these kind of issues. How would you approach that kind of a subject?
Well, I would first try and maybe practice asking these questions to someone that you have a supportive and you feel comfortable and have a good relationship with, so you can kind of have, best case scenario, maybe do some role playing and obtaining the answers or responses that you would find to be supportive. I think if you're unsure how your supervisor might respond, you can maybe share some very, very brief information. You can just let them know, hey, I've been having a hard time. You don't have to go into explaining, some of those symptoms, but I think just maybe extending and seeing how they respond. Start with something small, like, hey, I've been having a really hard time lately, and kind of see where that leads.
And I'll just quickly add on to Carrie's comment. I think that's very true, especially because I see a lot of comments in the chat about I don't feel very comfortable either because there's not trust with my supervisor or I'm not sure how they'll respond. And I think Carrie's comment is very, very well suited because if you are experiencing some type of mental health, but you want to talk to your supervisor about it, you don't always necessarily have to use the term mental health. As Carrie said, you can just say I'm having some issues, or you can start in a broad spectrum, and then depending on how that conversation goes, go into a little bit more detail without using words, as some people said, that might trigger a certain stigma or mentality.
That's right. So let's go ahead. Carrie, you're going to go and walk us through kind of another exercise that kind of will touch on some of these on how to have these conversations. So, Carrie, you want to take it from here?
Yes. Thank you, Jessica and Eric. So we're going to transition more to talking about how we can ask for help. We can ask for help by finding a trusted colleague, supervisor, mentor, friend, or family member that we feel comfortable having a tough conversation with. We can only share what we are comfortable sharing, and we can use prompts from Find Your Words to ask for help, just to kind of give us some stepping off points. We can ask or say, I think something's wrong because I'm feeling stressed. I'm worried that I may be depressed. Can we talk? I want to talk to you about something that's hard for me to put into words. I'm feeling down, and it's been going on for a while now. I think I should see a therapist, but I'm scared. Can you help me find one and make sure I keep the appointment? I want to let you know that I'm living with depression. I may need extra support while I'm dealing with this. Even though I may seem fine on the outside, I feel anxious on the inside. You can support me by being supportive and listening. That would be really helpful. We can support others who need help by encouraging our VISTA members and colleagues to practice self-care and offer to help them as appropriate. We can reaffirm that it is okay and normal to ask for help and that these experiences are common. We can reinforce that help is available. We can be open-minded and non-judgmental in our communication approach. We can try not to give advice, but listen without judgment. And we can ask open-ended questions and provide validation and acknowledgement. Now we'd like to hear a little bit more from you. Jessica?
Thank you, Carrie. So what are some additional ways that we can support others who need our help? So maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone you just see going through a tough time. What are some ways that we can support one another? So go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll go and see what you guys have to say. All right, Eric, do you see anything in there?
So I really, really appreciate one person said that sometimes just being around, just being a listening ear is a huge step. You may not have to even say anything, but just having someone to hug and be near makes a big difference.
That's true. Yeah, just a simple I'm here for you can be huge.
Open and honest dialogue, definitely not just with your supervisor, but with anyone you feel comfortable talking with.
And let's take a look here. Someone said just normalizing conversations like this is key.
And I like the kind notes. It could be just a quick post-it note, but happy thoughts and notes to coworkers or people who might need it.
There is a question here about the healthcare options with VISTA. Put your question in the Q&A. We're going to get to that here in just a second. I just want to make sure I don't lose that thread because there are benefits available. So put that in the Q&A. And yeah, Michael said there's definitely a time to just shut it and listen. Just listen. So keep those coming. Carrie's going to just go over just a summary of the resources that we've gone over here today. So Carrie, you want to talk a little bit about the numerous resources that we have available?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. Before we end, I want to share a list of national resources that are available to you. Again, you will find links to all the resources in this presentation on the VISTA campus. In addition, a recording of this webinar will also be posted with any additional resources in about 1 week. And they're all posted there on the screen. And I want to thank you all for taking the time today to participate in this webinar and to engage in some professional self-care. I hope you all can utilize and build on your self-care plans and continue to provide awesome care and support to your teams, members, and communities. I appreciate your time and commitment to your work, and please take care of yourselves and each other.
Thank you, Carrie. So we're gonna before we get to kind of next steps, we do just want to ask a question. We're going to go over this briefly, but keep typing them in the chat. What are some strategies that you've included in your self-care plan? So Carrie introduced that at the beginning of this session, and there are a variety of self-care plans out there, but maybe you've learned something here today that you want to add. So just put that in your self-care plan, put that in the chat, let us know, and Eric is going to get to just really quickly some things you can do if you have just a bit of time or a lot of time. So Eric, you want to run through these?
So just as a reminder, we all struggle to find time to take care of ourselves, and yet as service providers, it is very important. We can definitely take better care of others if we take good care of ourselves. So here are some quick ways that might support you with your own mental health. If you have 5 minutes, do the 5 senses exercise. 15 minutes, you could write 3 good things that happened to you that day. 30 minutes, maybe a lunch break, review and update your self-care plan. 45 minutes, take a walk or a hike before or after your service. And if you have even 60 minutes a day or a week, spend time with a friend or a family member.
Thank you, Eric. So we would generally, this would be the point where we do the evaluation because we want us to tell you how much you love us. But unfortunately, the evaluation is down, so it's going to be sent to you via email. So keep an eye out for that, and we apologize for those technical difficulties. But that means there's now time for questions. So once again, I do just want to say thank you to Carrie and Eric and everyone on the call here making this possible. And now we want to take some of the questions that you have. We are going to introduce how to ask questions over the phone, and then we'll also take some from the Q&A. So Amanda, are you there, and can you let us know how to ask a question over the phone?
I am here. Thank you. We will now begin our question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name slowly and clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. Again, that is *1. One moment, please.
Wonderful. Thank you. So a few questions are coming in here. Let's take a look. And Eric, you tell me if you already caught one.
Okay.
Okay, so we had a question come in from someone named Rachel. Rachel asks, we had an employee, I don't know if it was their supervisor, they recently went on a sabbatical due to secondary stress, and they're now just recently returning, and they're wondering how to have a conversation with that person around their triggers so that they can hopefully avoid those or make it a less stressful environment. So Carrie, in this kind of a situation, if you know someone has these triggers but you're not quite sure what they are and you want to be conscious, how would you have that conversation with them?
I think this could be brought up, you know, if you're having supervision with that client, or just having a discussion about how can I best support you? What things can we possibly modify or change, you know, to help best support you during your workday? I think it could be general, but I know we also mentioned reasonable accommodations earlier in the webinar, and so that could be an option where they can even put in like a written request for reasonable accommodations, and that could prompt the discussion about what maybe we could change. I know some things that were mentioned were wellness rooms, things of that nature in the chat earlier.
Thank you. Eric, do you find any questions in there?
There is a second question, and Carrie, I'll ask it even though you pretty much answered it, but if you have anything to add, Michelle asks, how can you start a conversation with your supervisor about your mental health needs without going into too much detail, because when I've asked about it, they refer to the policy and say it's not approved. So I know you briefly touched on that, but is there anything else you'd like to add about starting the conversation either about mental health needs or to let them know there's something they need support in?
Well, I think, you know, using I statements, you know, as we mentioned earlier, but also, you know, just having that, starting a prompt with, you know, I'm just really struggling, and trying to have them attend to the struggling piece and not focus on the policy. You know, the policy may be helpful, and that could possibly be a jumping off point if you want to work with your supervisor or put something written for a reasonable accommodation request. That can be a starting point. But I think, you know, share what you're comfortable sharing and let them know that you would really like their help in terms of addressing some of the issues that you're having. Kind of have it be broad, general, and see where it goes.
Great, thank you for that.
I want to go to Amanda. Amanda, are there any questions that have come in over the phone?
We currently have no questions, but as a reminder, please press *1.
Thank you. And it looks like that eval has actually just popped up on the right-hand side. So if you could take our evaluation and let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want more of. We do these webinars for you. We want to make sure that it's covering the items that you want covered because that's why we do it. We do it for you. So let us know, and we do read them and take them to heart in our planning. So please go ahead and do that. Let's take a look at another Q&A question. I am going to address a question that came in as I'm waiting for the chat to load, or the Q&A to load up for me, was around the Vista Health policy. So Vista, or not health policy I should say, but Vista Healthcare. So the Affordable Care Act has stated that mental health services are considered essential benefits. And what that means is that insurance providers have to include mental health services in their plans. So if you have health insurance, you should check in with your provider, check their brochure to determine what their level of coverage is. And if you have insurance, you can use our health care allowance to reimburse you for co-pays of those essential visits. So check that out. If you don't have insurance and you're legally exempt and you're in our health benefit plan, you do get 3 mental health visits with the health benefit plan. So there are those benefits available. Eric, anything else? Oh, telehealth. Do you want to talk about telehealth a little bit?
Sure. So obviously, in addition to the healthcare that Jessica mentioned, telehealth is something that's now available to Vista. So if there's maybe not an urgent need to go to the hospital, but something that you're not feeling well and you need some assistance, you can call a phone number and get some advice over the phone, and they can at least initially diagnose or give you some ideas as to what the symptoms are. So it's a way that you don't have to travel unless it's an urgent or emergent situation. So it's a great benefit that Vistas now have the availability to utilize as part of their service.
Thank you, Eric. Carrie, this question is for you. Someone said, I wasn't familiar with the concept of vicarious trauma before this webinar. Is it similar or related to compassion fatigue?
That's a great question. I would say it's related to compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue, I kind of think of it as, you know, we ourselves, you know, when our well is dry, that's when we may struggle to be as compassionate and present in our work. Vicarious trauma can be more around what we're exposed to in our work settings, whether it be, you know, like Jessica, you mentioned you were working in domestic violence in your Vista year. So I would think in some of those settings, we may be more apt or prone to experiencing vicarious trauma just due to the nature of the services that we're providing or the clients we're engaging with. I know burnout is also related to some of these topics, and that is something that we can experience when we're just having a lack of empathy or a lack of compassion, and they're all kind of in the same family. And, you know, some of the resources we provided break those down a little bit more. The Joyful Heart Foundation on their website, they have a great discussion and section on vicarious trauma that can maybe a jumping off point if you want to learn a little bit more on your own.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's go back to Amanda. Amanda, are there any questions over the phone?
We currently have no questions.
Wonderful. So I do want to be cognizant of the time. It is a minute past 3 o'clock Eastern time, and we are now officially over the time allotted. So I do want to respect that you may have other things to go to. I do want to say that we are going to stick around and answer some more of your questions, as there are still some in the Q&A. So if you can, stick with us. If you have questions, we'd love to answer them. So just wanted to let you all know this will be recorded, as we've mentioned. So if you can't stay, you can always view the recording. But Eric, do you have a question that came up?
Carrie, I'm going to kind of rephrase the question so it makes a little sense, but there was a question about if you happen to know of any grants that Vistas can write for self-care, for example, if their organization has a really small or non-existent budget for things like that. Are there either any grants that you know, or any, in addition to what you've already mentioned, any really good free resources they can point to so that, because Vista mentioned he wants to bring the information from this webinar to a supervisor, but is concerned they're going to say no because they don't really have a budget to bring a program to the office.
That's a great question. I know there's one really good website that I often draw on. It's where you can find good information and introductions to self-care and some of the self-care planning worksheets as well as assessments around self-care. And it's through the University of Buffalo's social work site. That could be an option. In terms of grants and things that might be available, you know, off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but I can certainly look into it. I know there also could be, you know, not necessarily practicing self-care in your organization, but on your own time. You know, there are some gyms and agencies like, you know, the YWCA, where they can offer discounted membership or discounted rates for access to their gyms or their classes. And that could be something that, you know, you could possibly write a grant or a statement about to try to access, kind of depending on where you're located. Those could be some options to pursue. There's a really great book that you could pick up at the library. It's called Trauma Stewardship, and it's kind of an introduction and a breakdown to trauma-informed care, and it's a social worker who's experienced just working in the field and kind of how she dealt with some of the stresses and things that she was experiencing but didn't necessarily have words to put to them. So that could be something that you could seek out, read, and maybe present some of that stuff to your supervisor. Just simple things like having doing a 2-minute check-in at the start of a staff meeting or at the end of a staff meeting. Just some simple things that wouldn't be costly. You can kind of just build into your existing time.
Thanks, Carrie. So another question here, this person has said, there have been times when I have become so overwhelmed with my work, thinking maybe I don't have the skills, experience, or mental health necessary to complete it. I care about the project, and I don't want it to suffer. What happens to a VISTA project if the VISTA member leaves? So I do first just want to say, I'm so sorry to hear that you feel overwhelmed. My recommendation would be to talk to your supervisor and let them know your feelings about this and kind of what you're experiencing. Let them know what feels overwhelming, and maybe there's a way that they can, work to adjust some of your projects, maybe some of the timelines on those projects, so that, it reduces that feeling of being overwhelmed, and that maybe you can stay. If you talk with your supervisor and you determine that maybe it's not a right fit and that maybe you do need to leave service, there may be an opportunity for that project to get another VISTA at another time. But the first step is having that conversation with your VISTA supervisor, because as I'm sure most VISTA supervisors in general and the ones on this webinar will say, they don't want to ever see you leave, and they want to have that conversation first.
Absolutely.
Eric, anything to add to that?
I would just say that, and this has been my experience in life, as we said, it's important to know you and your own situation with mental health, with stress, anxiety. Also just understand, and I'm sure all of you do, that your supervisors also might be going through their own mental health stress and anxiety, so there might be times where they seem like they're lashing out at you or they're upset or the situation is overwhelming. And it may not be that they mean it that way, it just might be that they're also trying to deal with their own situation. So being respectful of that, but also understanding, as Jessica said, you want to be able to figure out what you need, also understanding where the other person is at, and then hopefully in a conversation can come to understand how you guys can support each other, and then hopefully how that will help sustain you throughout your year of service through the difficult but also through the positive times.
Thank you, Eric. Amanda, are there any questions over the phone?
There currently are no questions.
Okay, thank you. Eric, are you seeing any that we may have missed in the Q&A?
Not right now, no.
All right. So I think that kind of wraps it for us. It seems like we don't have any lingering questions, but if you leave this webinar and realize, oh man, I forgot to ask that question, you can always contact us at vistawebinars@cns.gov. As always, we do thank you for attending this webinar, and we hope that you can join us for our next webinar. Our next webinar for VISTA supervisors is in January. It's being an effective intermediary, and that's January 23rd. And then the same day, we have one for VISTA members around conducting a community needs assessment. Keep an eye out for those invites. Thank you again, Carrie, for all the information that you've shared. Eric, thank you for being a wonderful co-host. And Rachel, Jenny, and everyone who made this happen, thank you again. Everyone, have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your 2017, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year.